everyone, Dr. Jason Old here, surfer, historian, world traveler, and your host of the Surfing Historian podcast. This season, we'll be diving deeper into the nuanced world of surfing and examining the historical, cultural, philosophical, and even scientific elements of the sport we're all stoked on. So let's paddle out together and ride through the world of academia. This episode is sponsored by Banana Bag Oral Solution. These are definitely not your typical dehydration supplement. In fact, they're my personal go-to after a long surf session when I'm looking to avoid exhaustion and dehydration. Check them out at bananabag.org and use promo code STAYSTOKED for 10% off your purchase. You'll also get free shipping if you join their mailing list. Joining me today from Tampa, Florida is Jesse Casanova. Jesse is the Assistant Director for International Programs at the University of South Florida Health International. While he himself is not a surfer, his profound knowledge in public health and illnesses associated with international travel is vast. At USF Health, he oversees all international partnerships, new site development, global collaboration, relationship management, and student and faculty travel. In addition, Jesse sits on various global committees for USF World and helps oversee the Peace Corps Coverdale programs at USF. Jesse's also part of the President's Advisory Council as an executive member of the Status of Latinos Committee. He's worked in the field of public health for over 15 years and was a Peace Corps and Peace Corps response volunteer in Togo, Cameroon, and Senegal. In addition, Jesse's worked in global health, helping to manage the malaria health portfolio for Cameroon from the U.S. Embassy. He was also the liaison between Malaria No More and Global Fund in Cameroon, and has helped to train Peace Corps counterparts from over 10 sub-Saharan African countries. His research at USF includes hearing health projects in Malawi and South Africa, river blindness elimination projects in Nigeria with the Gates Foundation, G4 surveillance system restructuring proposals with Pasteur Institute of Dakar in Senegal, and intimate partner violence training of trainers in Egypt. Jesse's finishing his DRPH in public health leadership and holds a master's degree in international humanitarian action from the University of Deusto in Spain. For today's episode, we'll be chatting about the health risk associated with international surf travel. I'm super stoked to have you on to share all this incredible insight with our listeners. Jesse's also a very close friend and has worked together with me on nonprofit initiatives in Latin America. So I'm really excited to get a chance to have you on the show to share your knowledge with all of us. But before we get started, I want to personally thank you, Jesse, as well as our listeners for being part of this episode of The Surfing Historian.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for having me. I mean, I think it's an important conversation to have when it comes to the health of travelers that are going around, whether it's surfing or anything else. But I know this conversation is specifically focused on surfers and those who go out to surf. And I think it's important to have all the information available and make good decisions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And of course, this episode, I'm here with Jesse Casanova, as I said. It's about surfing, but, before we get into surfing, can you, for the listener, could you just give us a little bit more about your research, what compelled you to do it, kind of why you're in this field?
Yeah. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I was living in West Africa, and one of the responsibilities that I had was malaria projects, right? So we worked with local communities on various projects. HIV/AIDS was one of them, malaria was another, and the importance and the impact of malaria in those communities and families and homes and in communities. It's devastating in many of those locations. So I was in Togo for about 2.5 years, worked in a very small community, no running water, no electricity, but just really enjoyed it, learned a lot about the communities, learned a lot about public health, and learned a lot about myself while I was there.
Awesome, man. Yeah. Just, I know you said, Cameroon, you mentioned, some of the places you've been in Africa, which, some of those have coastlines. Were you ever at the coast? Did you ever see anybody, surfing or wave riding or interacting with the ocean?
Yeah, actually, both Togo, where I was originally posted, and Cameroon have some surfing. It's a little difficult for individuals there because of the riptides to go out and surf. There's not a very big surfing area. However, in Ghana, which is right next to Togo, there was a lot of surfing. So I would go to certain communities that were coastal to visit, and there was always a surfer or two or 10 in the water.
So when you say, just to clarify, because I know, Morocco has just insane surf. Senegal,
yes.
The west coast of Africa has really great surf. And in fact, a fellow surfing historian, Kevin Dawson's written a really good book on sort of that legacy of surfing called Undercurrents. And for those of you that are listening, definitely check that book out. It really looks at sort of the areas that Jesse's talking about historically, and that historical relationship not only with the ocean but with wave riding. And so, but I want to come back to my question I had for you. You said you saw surfers. Were they foreign surfers? Were they local surfers? Like, what was the demographic of surfer you're encountering?
Most of them were foreign, but there were several local surfers that were there as well. I know I encountered them when I was in Senegal as well, along La Corniche, which is where you have a mixture of people that go to the beach and people that go surfing. And so I know that they were there as well. But they're predominantly, I would say, foreign. This is obviously years ago. I know that the demographic is switching. And there's a lot more local uptake in surfing, which is great. But at that moment, it was still predominantly foreigners coming in.
Yeah, I just, I kind of made that assumption, but I wanted to kind of hear it from you.
Yeah.
But and so let's talk a bit more about those, let's say those foreign surfers, the surfers who are setting out on a surf trip.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that. What, there's a lot to really talk about, because of your area of expertise, but what are most surfers tend to travel to more, say, tropical places that are more part of the developing world. And so could you just give us like a bit of maybe a brief run through of some of the sicknesses, let's say, that traveling surfers need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to separate this conversation into several different topics, right? Because to say sicknesses is a very, very broad statement. And so, there's trauma, which if you've been surfing, if you're a surfer, I know I'm not a surfer, but I've seen my fair share of it, right? So if you're out in the water, you're on a board, you've had trauma, right? If you've been out more than once.
What do you mean by trauma in terms of, public health or injury, or what do you mean by that? So
the vast majority of trauma that surfers face are actually from their own surfboard. And so, I was reading a few of I was doing some literature review, and it's interesting. The leash has both a negative and a positive effect, right? And anyone who surfs and uses a leash kind of has that already in the back of their mind, like they know, right? If you're out in the water, a leash is going to, if you fall, something happens, it's going to recoil the surfboard right towards you. Yeah,
it keeps it from getting away from you. But yeah, as you say, it's got its drawbacks as well.
Right, but keeping it coming back to you means it's not hurting others.
Right.
So the incidence of trauma caused by runaway surfboards to other surfers has gone down, but the incidence of trauma to the surfer who has the leash attached has gone up. And a lot of the studies that I read are very interesting. So they're saying, those individuals that don't have a lot of expertise in surfing, they're beginners, or even at the low intermediate level, they get more trauma, but it's less severe. However, the experienced surfers and those that surf competitively have fewer trauma, but they're more severe.
Right. Okay.
So there's a trade-off between both.
Yeah, and just to give you an example, and I'm sure the listener, many of which are surfers, they probably could recall an instance of trauma, whether it's on themselves or a friend. And for example, surfing in Nicaragua, when I worked at the surf camp there, I had a buddy. He's now a buddy, but he was a guest at the camp at the time, and he had come back, and as you said, he fell. And when he fell, the surfboard turned, sort of the nose was facing him. And as he kind of swam up or, thrusted his foot down to come up, the leash sort of sprung into his face and poked him right in the eye. And he didn't lose his eye, but, it was pretty close. And so those are really kind of bringing us back to these, I use the word sickness, but so when we talk about traumas in that regard, you're referring to instances such as that.
Right. So things that's bodily injury, right? So sprains, strains, lacerations, and fractures are the most common types of trauma, right? When the surfboard kind of recoils with the leash and kind of hits you. Or if you're trying to do a maneuver and you twist an ankle, right? You are thrust underneath the water by the force of the water, and there's coral underneath. Right, you get lacerations with that. So those tend to be, or against jetties as well, right? So those are the most common injuries that surfers face.
Okay, cool, yeah, and again, for the surfer listening, you're like, yeah, okay, we know that, and so, but what are some of the other sicknesses? I know I'm using a bit of a broad or general term there, but what are some of the other sicknesses traveling surfers should be aware of or prepare for?
So this is a bit of a segue into the next part, right? And so we're looking at, yes, you can have a traumatic event in the water, and I think most surfers will get out for a second, shake it off, and just go right back in, right? Which is fine, but there's other concerns, right? So when it comes to lacerations, for example, depending on the cause of the laceration, we're looking at infection, we're looking at things that can really cause severe long-term damage to the individual.
So this is, sorry to interrupt, but this is so, you fall, you're surfing in Indo, for example, you fall, you hit the reef, you tear your back up. This is what you're talking about when you talk about lacerations. Okay, yeah.
But also, things can become chronic, right? So a lot of the surfing injuries actually that occur when it comes to shoulders occurs from paddling out. Right. Okay. And paddling out and duck diving, because you're consistently using the same muscle groups. And if you're not really doing it properly, you don't know the techniques, it can actually become a chronic issue, because then you have damage to your shoulder, you have damage to the muscles, and you're consistently using it without a proper rest or without, looking at it correctly. And then that can cause, chronic pain.
So we're talking about, paddling out, duck diving, sort of, are you putting that under the category of overuse?
Yeah, so with overuse, it can actually become chronic, right? And so we'll delve into the chronic section, because there's a lot of chronic diseases and chronic illnesses that surfers ought to be aware of when they're planning their travel, right? How do you mitigate risks if you have something that you're working through that's kind of a long-term disease? And
it's many surfers probably are like, oh, it's fine, I'm going on a surf trip, it's all good, I'll endure the pain. So, and many of us have done that and do that, but it's really good to have you on, like I said, to really from that public health safety perspective, at least inform us on what we could do for those that wish to. Yeah. And so a little bit more on these, some of the other sicknesses.
Well, I wanted to kind of come back to the laceration, right? Because I think that's an important thing, because, especially depending on what is the cause of the laceration, that can become an issue, right? Because there's a lot of agents out there, E. coli, for example, staph infections, marine infections from marine aquatic parasites, as well as things like cholera. And we'll get into cholera in a minute, because that's important. Oh, we will. Okay. We'll talk about it. But I think it's important. And one of the interesting things that I saw in the literature as I was going through all of the the publications it's the importance of hearing health, ear infections. So consistent and unabated surfing in cold water and sun exposure and not taking care of your ears has also become an issue when it comes to hearing loss. And so now that's something that every single publication has always mentioned that I read is ear infections, ear discharge, and making sure that you take care of your ears with that. And there's a lot of pros and cons to earplugs, right? So I'm not here to promote the use of earplugs or say don't use earplugs. Do your research, figure out where you're going, and you know people, all travelers, surfers specifically, are able to make their own judgment as to what risk they're willing to take. So my point and my goal for this is not to dissuade people from traveling, but rather to say, hey, you know your own risk, but it's better to be forewarned with all of the information available.
Right.
And then you can make any kind of decision to mitigate whatever risk you can mitigate while you're out there traveling and surfing.
Yeah, and I don't, I think this is a very, very valuable episode because, a lot of the listeners are surfers, and a lot of the listeners, those that are surfers, travel, and even those that aren't surfers, a lot of them are, engaged in international travel. So I think, as you said, it's not to dissuade anybody. This is just to inform, and I think this is a very valuable episode on, how to safely approach, let's say, international travel, but our focus being surf travel. But and so just, you mentioned hearing health, and just for the listeners, I know I've mentioned this in the intro, but what work do you do with hearing?
So a lot of the work that I've been doing is in collaboration with other researchers to look at the impact of wax, right? Impacted wax, and particularly in old age patients as well. So I've partnered with some faculty and helped doing with hearing health in Malawi and in South Africa.
Yeah, that's awesome. So your understanding of the impacts of, say, active sport on hearing, or hearing in general, is something that you've spent some significant time studying.
Yeah.
So thank you for. Yeah. That's something that I think a lot of us, myself I should say, overlooks. I don't personally use earplugs, and I don't think a lot about those things. So I appreciate you making myself and the listeners also aware.
And there's two things that I wanted to kind of go over real quick as well. So the first is pneumonia, right? Pneumonia and fevers. So I want to make sure that I emphasize, pneumonia, especially if you're traveling and you don't have access to adequate medical care, pay attention to that. It is very, very vital that you seek medical care. Fever is, again, one of those things that is a symptom of everything, right? But it's a symptom that you should not ignore, right? Because fevers can lead to other things as well. And at the end of the day, you need to figure out what's the causative agent behind the fever to really make sure that you're understanding what was your risk, what caused it, and then, of course, seeking medical care or attention to treat. And all of this, and I'll repeat that in the recommendation, right, is doing research ahead of time, not just knowing what's there, but also, do you know where the nearest medical center is? Do you know where the nearest doctor or hospital are located? If you were to break a leg or have a fracture, how do you get there? Right. And thought through those processes.
Yeah, and a lot of the places, I'm thinking of some of the places I surfed in, say, Nicaragua or Indonesia, or some of these places that are, for the most part, certain areas remote. And if you sustain a major trauma, as you were talking about, you're pretty far from a hospital that could treat that injury. And so I guess you mentioned the fever and some of these sicknesses. What are some of those? What are some of the things one could get while traveling to these places that would what would fall under that fever sort of banner or umbrella? Like, what are some of the things we're susceptible to?
Yeah. Well, before we get into the specific, because we're going to look at vector-borne diseases, right? Which is any disease that's spread by an insect or some other way, right? So lice, mice, bats, mosquitoes, ticks, all of these things are vectors for disease. And we'll go through some of those here in a minute. But before we do that, I wanted to kind of go over, I know that in the United States, many states have rules. Well, they're not rules, right? They're guidelines about when you can surf after a rain event.
Right.
Right.
California is a good example of that.
Right. California has a 72-hour rule.
Right.
So what they're saying is, after a rain event, you should wait 72 hours before you go out.
Right.
And a rain event is classified as anything equaling or above 0.25 centimeters of 0.25 centimeters of a rain.
Okay. So I know a lot of, and again, sorry to interrupt you, but yeah. I know a lot of Californians know this, right? So can you, and maybe you were going in this direction already, can you tell us what we risk getting when we surf after these rain events? Because I know a lot of us, depending on how good the surf is, are going to ignore some of those guidelines. But what risk are we putting ourselves up against?
What happens during a rain event is, when water sources in water treatment facilities are overflowing, sometimes those are leached into the oceans. But also a lot of the sediment from nearby farms, other areas, they will actually run off also into the water, right? And the water's already churning. Yeah. Because there's a storm, there's waves, people are going to be out there, right? And so it actually increases the susceptibility of getting sick, of getting an infection from one of these things. So cholera is an example of that. Okay. Right. So cholera is a way to do that. Leptospirosis is another one, which we'll go over in a minute. There's a bunch of other diseases. Rates of fever have gone up when surfers go out in the water, and this has been documented, right? Yeah. The fever aspect of it. And so there was a study done, and 40% of surfers, it's interesting, they didn't even know there was a health advisory, right? So whenever there's a rain event, there's usually a health advisory that follows, but not always. Sometimes a health advisory in Florida, for example, we have algae blooms, right? And so there's health advisories to that because although it won't kill you, it's not very safe to your health. And for many other reasons, if there's an overspill from a water treatment facility, then there's fecal matter in the water, right? And so they'll say, hey, surfing and water advisory, don't go in the water, right?
And the thing about California and in other places as well, but in say like Southern California, for example, it doesn't rain a lot, so it's not flushing. You have the oils from the streets, you have all of these things that are, say, accumulating on land that when this hard rain comes, just rushes right into the water. And again, I know the Californians listening are like, yeah, man, we know this. But, I think the important thing is to say, okay, yes, we all do know this, but what kind of trouble can we get ourselves in when we ignore those recommendations? Right,
and so those are some of them, right? And the United States has a very good surveillance system when it comes to those health advisory and health adverse events in the water. Many countries do not, right? And so you may not get a health advisory for, going out if you're going to surf in Ghana, all right? Right. Or you may or you may not, right? The point is kind of do a little bit of research, but many countries don't have that. And so you also don't have the stringent regulations for water runoff, for control, for erosion, for pesticides. And many of these locations, animals will go into the water, relieve themselves, and it's just a matter of knowing. And again, this is part of knowing, and we'll get to it at the end of the recommendation, right? Knowing the local culture, knowing the local people there, because they kind of have an idea of where you should and shouldn't be, right? And not just because they're scared of the water or they don't have skill, but they know in certain locations what's going on.
They're aware of what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so and that brings me to an interesting question. Let's say I'm going to maybe it is Ghana, maybe it is Cameroon, Indonesia, somewhere in northern Peru, wherever, we can rattle off a bunch of surf spots. But how do I find this information out? Like, how do I know what the risks are? For example, is there any place I can go for this sort of information?
Yeah, and this is something that I recommend to, all the students, for example, and people that are traveling from the university is we tell them, the CDC actually has a phenomenal surveillance system with other countries, right? So cdc.gov/travel. You put in the country you're traveling to, and it's going to tell you this is what's there, right? And it's going to give you kind of a snapshot of all the different things to look out for, things that are vaccine preventable. Very, very important to understand and to be updated on vaccines, right? Because they do save lives. So vaccine preventable diseases, you've got vector-borne diseases, you've got, they're going to give you a quick rundown of the vector, what's going on, the severity and the susceptibility of getting it. And they'll give you recommendations, right?
So like you said, the vector-borne sicknesses, you're talking about dengue, you're talking about malaria. Is that what you're talking about? Like Zika, things like that?
Yeah, it'll be some of those, and it'll be some of them that are just common things, right? Like hepatitis.
Okay.
Right. And so I think with that, we can probably move into the section on, we're going to focus first on things, I'm going to call this marine and waterborne illnesses.
Right? Okay, good. So this is something that, once I go get in the water and surf, I'm susceptible to this now.
So it's actually a combination of getting in the water to surf and then just being out and about, not in the water. Also, it's diseases that are transmitted by water, whether ingested like accidentally in the ocean or whether you are out in a community and you're trying to get some food.
Okay.
Right.
So this is under the umbrella of, let's say, how a restaurant in a particular place washes their dishes, washes their salads, etc.
That, and also recreation activities. So either Legionnaire's disease, for example, hot tubs are the number one place to get them, right? And I know that after you've been surfing all day, you want to relax, and that warm hot tub water, like it is soothing, right? It does help the muscles. But do you know when the last time that water was treated or changed, right? Because Legionnaire's hot tub is a really big place to get Legionnaire's, and it can be life-threatening.
So as you're talking about the I want to get to surfers in the ocean and some of the things that you're talking about. But are there, we always hear, hey, don't drink the water. Everybody loves to throw that phrase around. Are there any things that you could recommend that, and we'll get more into this when we talk about like what to pack, right? The med kit and things like that. But is there, as far as like something you can put in your water bottle or some sort of filter, is there any simple thing one could use to help filter some of this water we're talking about?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I do, right? Yes, you can go out in the market. It's flooded with these water treatments and water bottles that have filters in them, and you can do that for sure. What I tend to do is when I get to the location is I just buy a bunch of bottled water, like the big gallons.
Okay.
And I'll put them in my room and I refill my own personal water bottle from those.
Okay.
If I'm out and about, I'll make sure to try to buy from a store, from someone that I know isn't just like refilling old water bottles with water and closing them, right? But I if I'm out and about, then I'll just buy water. It's cheaper than buying some of these fancy straws and fancy water bottles.
Right.
It's cheaper. You're giving to local economy, and it's really helping locally. I would try to find things or places where, and I know this is impossible in some locations, to be able to then recycle those or reuse those, right? But in many of these countries, local families use some of those big plastic bottles for other uses. So they upcycle them for other things as well.
Yeah, and you raise a great point with that. A lot of these places, for example, I use Nicaragua as an example. They, you can buy these big jugs, and then you take the empty one back, and then you pay a fee to get a refill, but they don't refill that. You just
give you a new one.
Yeah. So yeah. Good. So let's get to the ocean. Let's get to the water. Talk to me about some of the things that we're at risk. We surfers put ourselves at risk when we go surfing in these places.
Right. So I'm going to go to another one. Again, another waterborne, Giardia.
Okay.
So Giardia is a parasite that is from contaminated water, usually fecal-oral route.
Okay.
Right? Meaning a street vendor, either they themselves didn't wash their hands after going to the restroom, or they touched something from someone who didn't wash their hands and they have Giardia in their hands, and then you consume that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And Giardia is, it's rough. The one way, because I mean, I've had Giardia before from local vendors.
So you were doing a little field work on this.
Someone had to.
Yeah.
And so the key telltale sign for me, the way that my body reacts, is not just burps, but sulfuric burps where you like taste egg.
Okay.
Right.
So this is a symptom.
That's a telltale symptom.
So surfers that are in these places, you might have Giardia if you're burping sulfur.
Yeah. If you burp and you taste eggs, you probably have Giardia. But again, double check. And I should have prefaced all of this by saying, I am not a physician.
Right.
So, all the information obviously is for your information and to encourage you to search for the information. All of the things that I'm going to talk about, if you go to the CDC website, I printed all of these things out there, one sheet information that you can get. It doesn't take long to find it on their site. I mean, it's fantastic, but definitely look at that. And then one thing about Giardia is, I know when we talk about, and we'll mention quickly, sexually transmitted infections, and we all know what STIs are.
Yeah.
Right? But there are other diseases, there are other infections like Giardia that can also be sexually transmitted.
Okay.
So if you are having unprotected sex with a partner, or whomever that may be, and either there you have Giardia, there's a possibility that you can get it that way.
Okay. So we've sort of covered a lot of these land, water sicknesses, right? Giardia and others. Are there any more that, sort of before we get into the ocean, some of the water sicknesses, are there any more we should be concerned with?
Yes.
All right.
So amoebas. So entamoeba histolytica.
You're really making it, I know we said we aren't trying to dissuade people, but you are sort of painting a very scary picture bleak picture of international travel.
Well,
but
I think it's important to know also because the vast, and we'll get to it towards the end as well, towards, the vast conception is, I'll just go get Doxy or I'll just go get Cipro.
Right.
And that'll take care of it.
The magic
but
pill,
it
Cipro?
doesn't work with a lot of these.
Okay.
All right. So for example, amoebas, you can take Cipro until the cows come home.
Right.
That's not going to help. Right. And the only way to really do it is to diagnose it is through to laboratory testing. And again, it causes some of the similar symptoms as Giardia. You can have very watery diarrhea, cramps, fever, the works, right? It can stop your surfing adventures.
Okay.
Very quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been on many trips, both me, myself, and taking care of others who certainly aren't able to paddle out and surf with us when they're, dealing with some of these sicknesses because they're in the bathroom basically all day long. Yeah.
So leptospirosis is another one. So that's transmitted by animal urine, actually. Again, remember the whole runoff, the rain event, to wait, because leptospirosis can leach into the water depending on where the animals have relieved themselves. Leptospirosis is both waterborne, but it's also land, right? And so we'll get to that one again. So
yeah, and I know I'm trying to nudge us along to get into the ocean, but there's really no. So for example, if you go somewhere where the water's crystal clear, beautiful reef breaks, that's not to say that some of these things you're talking about aren't in other words, there's no correlation between crystal clear water and it being super clean.
Not at all. So I did this training with local
and vice versa. Like, water that's not as clear could be, completely clean. So there's it's a higher probability that it's not. Okay.
But clean water doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe water, right? Those are two different words.
Right.
They mean two different things. And so
clear water doesn't mean safe water, yeah.
So I did a training with a lot of individuals, a lot of counterparts and local leaders in Cameroon. So I took a bottle of clean water and I opened it, right? And I took a drink out of it. I asked them, is this water safe to drink? And they said, yeah. I'm like, okay. I took a drink of it.
Right.
I'm like, yeah. I just opened it. It's a brand new water bottle. Like it's safe. And so then I took a little bowl, I mashed a banana, and then I threw in some like cocoa powder to make it look like poop, right? And I told them, hey, pretend this is poop. And I took a blade of grass and I rubbed it in, and then I dipped the blade of grass in the water, took it out, right? That blade of grass with that poop-like substance had absolutely no effect on the look of the water.
Right.
The water is still clear.
Right.
Right. And I asked them, is it safe to drink? And they said, everyone's like, no.
Right, and that's why I ask, is there's that assumption.
Exactly.
That, and I'm just to give you an example, a place like Uluwatu in in Bali, it's crystal clear, beautiful, picturesque, but there as tourism has grown and the warongs, which are these little sort of places along the cliffside and some of the other places, as that is sort of expanded, there's a lot more runoff into that water, right? And so even though the water is crystal clear, you have the reefs there and everything, there's still real reason for concern because of the runoff.
And so we're looking at land use, land cover, right? And so land use, land cover is how people use land and how they modify the environment for their use. And then as land use, land cover expands, of course, animal populations are shifting to other locations. And some of that is closer to the water, and where animals normally wouldn't relieve themselves, they might be relieving themselves near the water. And of course, you've got tides that come in and out, right? And so that causes concern.
Yeah, so there's, again, and I like how you put that, there's no real, just because the water is clear doesn't automatically mean it's, clean water that, you should be putting in your mouth. And so, all right, so we're kind of drifting towards the water, pun intended, I suppose. What are some of the things now? I'm in the water, I'm surfing, I'm paddling around. Are there any things that I should be, concerned about as a now surfer inside the water?
Yes, and so one of the things is marine life, right? Every surfer's like, yeah, of course, duh.
Yeah.
Right. But do you know what marine life exists in the area that you are going to be surfing in? Many surfers, not all of them, because some of them do the research and they know, hey, there's jellyfish here, or hey, there's stonefish, or hey, there's stingrays here.
Or sharks.
I had when I was doing, I think I mentioned this story to you, when I was doing my scuba diving lessons, this lady in the course asked, how do I know if there's a shark in the water? And the instructor said, oh, there's a very simple test. If you're out in the ocean, taste the water. If it's salty, there's a shark in it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we are in their environment, right? So, but again, I don't want to digress and just start talking about sharks, but so being aware of the marine life, but why? Like, what does that matter?
It matters because it can change what you end up surfing in or how you surf and when you surf.
Okay.
Right? So, for example, if you know that there's a lot of jellyfish in the water, but you still really want to get out there, then you might want to invest and look into wearing wetsuits that will prevent as much as possible those jellyfish. If there are none, then every person, like I said, assesses their own risk level that they're willing to take, right? And understanding that is important. Jellyfish things, people react very differently to them. Some of them, it's not a big deal. It burns a little bit, but they get over it and they get back in the water. Others can have anaphylactic shock depending, on the jellyfish as well.
Yeah.
A box jellyfish is not the same as, a different type of jellyfish that might be more common in the water. So
as you're talking about this, I'm thinking, okay, we've got jellyfish, and of course, many, if not every surfer listening is like, yeah, I've been stung by jellyfish, of course. Stingrays, right, that kind of nestle into the water on the shoreline, and you can step on them. And so, the joke is, I think it's even with sea urchins, all this stuff, I don't know how true this is. That's why I'm asking you. But the joke is like, I got to pee on it. Like, hey man, just look that way and give me the back of your leg. I'm gonna pee on it. Is that just something we as surfers think is just funny to do, or is there like legitimacy to that?
So there's no research that says that that's definitely how to treat a jellyfish sting.
So, but even anecdotally, is there?
Even anecdotally, right?
So it's more like surfers just wanting to like pee on their buddy.
Probably.
It's kind of okay. So urination when you step on a stingray is not the solution.
What's shown a little bit more evidence to helping, although it isn't necessarily a correlation to saying it's going to get rid of it, is heat.
Okay.
Right, putting a little bit of heat on it, washing, obviously removing if there's any remnants of the jellyfish still on you, obviously get that off first. Right. Wash it with soap and water, and then at the end of the day, really just apply a little bit of heat and let it rest for a little bit.
So maybe that's where the urine thing comes from, because it is warm.
It is warm, but it doesn't stay warm long.
So maybe that was part of their logic. Yeah, and so that's really, kind of in a more succinctly, because we were kind of joking around about that. So you get stung by jellyfish, you step on a sea urchin, or you step on a stingray. What kind of just in sum, what do we do again?
It depends on what stings you, right? And you may not know immediately, depending on where you are, right? So if you understand the marine life that's in the water, you'll understand that some fish will be more towards the coast, while some will be more inland. So really it depends on that. And again, knowing where your sense of safety and risk levels are, but also understanding where's a local clinic, how are you going to get there, right? Because depending on what stings you may need medical attention. If it's a box jellyfish, you better get medical attention, right? This is not something you're going to walk off.
Right. I mean, many of us, again, I'm speaking for myself, but probably for a number of surfers, we think about, what you were talking about earlier, if I fall and break my leg, or I fall on the reef and get scratched up, these lacerations, the traumas you were talking about, or of course a more obvious one, depending on where you are, like, if I get bit by a shark, like, where do I go? But these are, I wouldn't say they're overlooked, but they are also something that a traveling surfer should be mindful of, right? Like, where do we go? Not just if we break a leg or whatever, but if we, like you said, get stung by, say, a box jellyfish, if that's in that part of the world where you're surfing, like.
Right, and then a part of it also is observation, right? And so knowing local culture, knowing local surfers, because if it's a really nice surf spot, but local surfers aren't surfing there, there's probably a reason for that.
Right, yeah.
And so it's good to get plugged in and know local individuals that can be like, hey, there's a lot of X there, so we don't surf there just because it's not safe.
So how do you do that? I know as we've already said, you're not a surfer, but you are someone who is involved in public health. You travel to a lot of the same places where we surf, as we were talking about at the beginning. How do you get dialed in? Like, who do you talk to in these places? Right? Like, do you talk to, maybe not a surf camp because you aren't at a surf camp, but who do you talk to? Or where do we go for this information?
Yeah, so a lot of the places that I go to, for me, it's all about networking and relationship building, right? So I like to get plugged in to someone. If I am traveling to a location where I don't know anyone, right, my first thing is to do research. The health research, safety research, and of course, local culture, customs to get a better understanding. I like to book a tour with an agency, right?
Okay.
At least one tour.
Okay.
And the reason I do that is because then I get to know someone. There's at least one individual now that I know that if I get in trouble, something happens, I know that there's at least one person that I can reach out to and get in contact with them.
Yeah, that's good advice, actually.
Yeah.
Just getting, sort of dialing in with local folks.
And if you're planning a surf trip, try to do a day or two at a surf lodge, like a place
right.
that like they'll know the location, they know the culture, they know the people, they know the environment, and they can guide you. And then if you want to go off on your own, that's fine. But at least you have an in.
Yeah, and I agree with that there. As somebody who has worked at a surf camp as a surf guide, I worked there pre-smartphone, pre-Google and all that. So there was real value for these surf camps because you had that local knowledge. Like whether you're an expat surf guide or a local surf guide, But yeah, that's good advice too. Like if you do go on a surf trip, consider, a few days at a camp, and because they do know one of the things that I in sort of along those lines is, I was just in Hawaii surfing, and I'm not that familiar with the North Shore. I was there, it was in January, and I ended up connecting with somebody there who would take me out to surf, and and that seems a bit silly, but I went with someone who knew where to paddle in, because it's a lot of reef, where to paddle in, where not to, where to paddle in, where to paddle out, where, if it's a wave that looks good as a right, but there's super shallow reef there, like, he's like, hey man, don't, this is just a left. So getting that, whether it's about where to surf or what to drink or what to eat or where to go, that local knowledge, I think you nailed it. I think that's a real serious, significant takeaway from this episode, I think.
Well, especially when we're talking about, I think the bane of every surfer is coral, right?
Yeah.
Both good and bad. Like, it has a lot of good effects in the ocean and the water and how waves react to coral.
Yeah, of course.
But it's also the number one point of lacerations and injury.
Absolutely, yeah.
To surfers, right? And I think, and I'm not saying go out and do a full study on local coral life, right? But again, working with locals, knowing the coral is there, but also understanding that if you get cut by a coral and you don't take care of it immediately, the rate of infection is actually quite high.
Yeah.
And that's something that really needs to be taken care of. And if you're out in the water, you're out on the beach, I'm not saying like you need to rush to the emergency room. Well, depending on the laceration, you might need to.
Right.
But if it's just a small thing, honestly, soap and water.
Yeah.
Like, thoroughly wash it with soap and water. It might sting a little bit, but that's going to be kind of the biggest thing you can use is just have soap handy.
So there's a famous line. Oh, I don't know if it's there's a lot of famous lines in this movie. The movie North Shore. I think it came out in like 1987, classic. But one of the main characters, Rick Kane, he ends up falling. He's in Hawaii, falls, and he's and these local kids come up to him and they're like, "Scrub it, kook," and like with their Hawaiian accent. So I give you that example to say, do you scrub the rash or the laceration? Yes. Is that what we do?
Because some coral may still leave particles in the laceration and the cut, right? And the idea is you have to remove all foreign particles and then you have to clean it, right? So they're not wrong. So especially depending on the coral, depending on what it is, it may leave particles and that's going to cause infection.
So, yeah, I'm sure the Hawaiians listening to this episode are laughing at my accent, but the movie's pretty cool too. But yeah, so all right, let's talk about, we've talked about the traumas, the lacerations, we've talked about some of these, we've talked about getting sick. Okay, what do we do? What are some antibiotics or things that we can get there? And then let's talk about a med kit, right? So what kind of antibiotics or things, and I know you're not a medical professional, you're not prescribing things to our listeners, but okay, so I'm super sick in somewhere during I'm on my surf trip, I get super sick from a parasite or whatever. Like, what can I go do kind of immediately before I get to, like, say, a clinic?
Hydration.
Okay.
Right. A big way to avoid some of these is to make sure that you're drinking clean water. Make sure the hot food that you're eating is hot, especially if you're eating street food. Some of these are made early in the morning, and then by the afternoon they're still sitting there and they've been in the sun, right? And they've been festering, and they may taste good, but
yeah,
it may end up being dangerous. And the number one behind
the other, I'm sorry to interrupt, as you're talking, like some of the places have like flies that'll sit on them, so cooking it thoroughly cooks that off as well, right? So
flies, the way that flies transmit disease, they don't carry it naturally on them. It's actually on their legs.
Okay.
Right. So they go land in poop and they come land on the food.
Right. Okay, so yeah, but thoroughly cooking this meat, say we're buying meat out in the street, thoroughly cooking it will, in theory,
so
make it safer to eat?
Yeah, so the idea is that you buy street food that's coming off the pan,
Okay.
right? So like it's coming off the fire.
Like you're watching the dude cook it.
Like they're making it fresh in front of
Right,
you.
okay.
I love street food. I'm not even going to lie. I'm not going to say don't eat street food.
Yeah, of course. We're not. We're just trying to be careful here. We want to enjoy our surf trip. We want to taste, pun intended, the local culture.
Yes.
So this is not saying don't eat any of this, don't do this, don't do that. This is just saying, hey, like these are things as someone that is not accustomed to. These places.
You can mitigate your risk if you kind of know the best practices.
And mitigate risk and enjoy yourself.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So fruits and vegetables is another one, right? If you're going to buy fruits in the street, make sure that they're unpeeled. You peel them yourself.
Right.
Right. So peeled fruit can, depending, because again, they're peeled. You don't know the hands. You don't know the state of the knives or the machetes that have been used to cut them. So if you can peel yourself, peel yourself. Or buy them, take them home, wash them with your bottled water, not sink, and then eat them, right?
Okay.
Just make sure that you take care of that. Salads is a really big one.
Right.
Depending on
because it's being washed with some of the water there, and
right.
And that puts us at risk at all the things you just mentioned, earlier in the episode.
So like what I like to do is, if I'm going to eat a salad, I'm going to get it from a reputable location that I know you're not going to get sick from. Usually high-end hotels will have clean salads, but otherwise, buy the ingredients yourself, wash them at the house by yourself with clear, clean water, let them dry, and then chop it up and make your salad. But always be careful, make sure that what you're washing your salad ingredients with is clean, safe water, not sink, not from the sink.
Yeah, no, and so I guess just to kind of bring us back to getting sick. You said immediately one of the most immediate things to do is stay hydrated, right? Because if you're on the toilet or you're throwing up, you are becoming dehydrated, and
this is how for example cholera kills. Right. So now
I knew you were going to get back to cholera.
Yeah. So it's a big one, right? And so now like less than 1% of people die from it, but in the past people didn't know, right? And so dehydration is usually the main cause of death from cholera. So most places now, and again, you can look at the CDC one-page flyer, they'll tell you, as long as you're doing oral rehydration salts, as long as you're continually hydrating yourself, obviously seek medical care. And they have special cholera beds where like your butt area is cut out from the bed, right? So you can just poop all day long because you're going to lose an alarmingly large amount of fluids from your body.
Right. And I think people, again, I say people, I'm maybe just speaking for myself. Like we tend to overlook that or forget that as we're, sick and like I said, on the toilet or throwing up or whatever, like we are losing lots and lots of water. Like maybe we aren't aware of how much we're losing. So this recommendation is really,
But specifically, I would say oral rehydration salts, right? Because when you're losing through diarrhea, you're also losing essential salts.
Right, exactly.
And your body needs that, and just drinking water isn't going to replace that.
Right, yeah, and that's a key point there. I mean, are there, again, we're not here to promote any particular brand over another, but I know people that sort of the go-to people talk about is Gatorade, right? But what type of oral hydration salts is? I know one. Like I said, I was turned on to these by a friend of mine who was on the show. But they're banana bags. They don't taste like bananas, by the way. They taste like salt water actually, but. I found that those, whether I'm surfing or I'm doing, hot power yoga where I'm sweating like crazy, I found that those work really, really well. And like I said, my buddy turned me on to those. But do you have any you recommend?
So I change what I buy, but one of the things that I find, and I think everyone has already seen this and probably tried them, you have oral rehydration salts that are like in individual little packets.
Right.
That you can just throw in like a 16-ounce bottle of water. Right. Oral rehydration has to have a good balance of both salt and sugar to make sure that your body is taking that in and you're actually hydrating and not just over watering yourself, because that's actually a dangerous thing as well. You can overhydrate with just water, and that's
good to know.
That's not safe. But you can just buy those as little packets and just pack them with you, and use them as needed. Don't use them just because they taste good, or just make sure that you have them in case you do need them. And as you start getting diarrhea, make sure to hydrate. Diarrhea is 5 stools or more that are loose and watery in one day. And then that lets you know, okay, I definitely have diarrhea. Look at it. I mean, it sounds gross, right? But if there's blood, pus, or mucus in your diarrhea, then that's a cause for concern, right? Then you definitely need to go see get medical care immediately, because that could be an infection that's causing that.
Yeah. I mean, it's serious. Again, it's. But so we've just talked about some oral hydrations, a number of different things that you've recommended. Let's talk about, you're getting ready for your surf trip. What's, say you're in California, or you're, here in Florida, or you're wherever, like somewhere where you have access to a whole host of things that you could put together for a med kit. What type of med kit? Because again, surfers, we're focusing on leashes and wax and our fins and our board, our trunks, all that. But what are some things that we could put in our surfboard bag that?
Well, before we get to that, I mean, I think we still need to get to the juicy part, right?
Oh, okay.
Vector-borne diseases.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry.
Those things that are transmitted by, mosquitoes, ticks, lice, fleas.
So we're going to save the med kit for the end, the teaser. All right. So,
med kit.
Stick around, guys. We're going to have, the med kit is coming. Don't worry.
So, there's other things to look at, right, besides being in the water.
Right.
Because you're also in the environment.
Okay.
And it's an environment that you do not know more often than not. And so having an idea of the different vectors and how to protect yourself and signs and things to look for when you're out there. And before we get to the vectors, I just wanted to hit one thing that we mentioned earlier. So when it comes to like waterborne, there's many more that I didn't mention. Some of them, like hepatitis A.
Oh, yeah, okay.
These are vaccine preventable diseases, right? If you are not vaccinated for hepatitis A or typhoid, please do it.
Yeah.
That's my recommendation. It really is going to help in the long run, particularly when some of these are just waterborne. You drink water that's contaminated.
Right. So that's very much preventable through the hepatitis vaccine that you can get at your local pharmacy.
Yeah. You can schedule it and get it almost anywhere in the States.
Okay.
Now for vector-borne diseases, so I don't know that many people know this, but more people in wars historically, far more have died from vector-borne diseases than from bullets.
Okay.
Bullets and swords combined, right? So mosquitoes, lice is a big one.
Okay.
And I know that, there's a reason why in the States, like as soon as a kid has lice, they send him home.
Right.
Not just because they can
send him
pass
home, shave his head.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you had experience?
No, but I've been told by a friend. No, that's kind of like the, growing up, it's like, oh, if you get lice, you shave your head. So I kind of said that jokingly, but I guess that's a real thing.
No, but it is a real thing for a lot of people.
Okay.
Right? And so especially when, you have among immigrant families, for example, that tend to live much closer together in smaller areas, it historically has been an issue. It's not that much of an issue anymore, but schools still randomly check for that because lice do pass, and there's many diseases that lice transmit, right? And so the same thing with fleas. Obviously, we know the Black Death transmitted by fleas that were on rats and other things as well, prairie dogs, as well. So anyway, typhus and paratyphus are some of them. So these actually can also be transmitted sexually.
Okay.
And not
Good to know.
Many people know that. It's not very common that they do, but they can be. And so Chagas is another one. Do you know what that is?
I recognize the name, but what is that?
So it's the kissing bug or the assassin bug.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
And so,
Those are found, again, not to scare people. Those are found in Latin America, I believe.
they're found in Latin America, Southeast Asia. They're found almost everywhere.
Okay, so.
And so the way that Chagas is transmitted, the kissing bug will bite you. And as it's sucking its blood, it's engorging.
Right.
And it's pooping.
Right.
At the same time.
Okay.
And the way that you get infected with Chagas is not through the bite, it's through the poop.
Right.
Because it'll itch, and so the bug goes away.
Yeah.
And then you actually scratch the poop into the wound.
So
and then you infect yourself.
Okay, so what do we do? What do we do with that? Again, are those you're going to get fever? You still kind of go along with the hydration thing, but you're getting worse and worse and worse.
Chagas, it's something that can be identified at a local hospital, and I would recommend if you've been bit by it's a triatome, right? It's a kissing bug. It's called a triatome.
Right.
If you've been bit by them, I would if you see it, don't scratch it. Wash it off before you do anything.
So because this is this isn't it's an episode where we just have the audio. We just, for those of you who are wondering, what that looks like, just in case you come across it, look it up and so you have a visual of so if you were kissed by the kissing bug, you know what it looks like. So all right, so I guess with a lot of these, and I don't know, maybe you have some more you want to talk about, but one of the step one with any of this is, as you said, hydration, right?
Yes.
What is step two? Step two is find a clinic.
Step two is if you have a fever, try to take some, like Tylenol, for example. Right?
Okay.
So you want to take acetaminophen.
Okay.
To reduce the fever, any swelling, any pain that you
Okay.
have. NSAIDs, like Aleve and others, are a bit harsher, right? And normally when you're sick and you have a fever, people don't want to eat.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so NSAIDs, if you haven't had food, can irritate the stomach, and long-term use of that can then create ulcers.
Okay.
Right? And so if you can avoid that and take Tylenol instead, that's why hospitals usually give Tylenol, right? Because you don't need to have food in your system.
Okay.
But always look at the bottle and the recommended dose, right? Make sure you're not taking it too soon, too close together, too long, too many pills in a day, because then that can have adverse effects on your liver.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good information, because, obviously we don't want people to freak out like, oh, I got a fever. Okay, I got bit by the assassin bug. Like I'm dying. I'm going to die here on this surf trip. So, that's not what we're trying to do here. Like,
correct.
Scare anybody from engaging in surf travel. It's just these are sort of very practical steps if one starts to not feel well.
Yeah, and then I'll mention it at the end again, but make sure that you get medical and evacuation insurance.
Okay.
It is not expensive. It's cheap, but it's going to be a lifesaver to the individual traveling, because depending on the company that you use, if you report an illness, say you have a fever, go to the doctor, report it, because if you report an illness in the country, I think some of them you have like up to 30 days from your return to then, if you get sick within their 30 days for that same thing, then the insurance company will usually cover a good portion of that. So you're not kind of left with holding the bag on that. Yeah,
and I've had an experience with that. And again, I'm not going to name names, but one thing I would recommend along those lines, and you pretty much nailed it there, is document everything. If you go to the doctor, be sure to keep all documentation, because in my experience with one international travel company, I ended up getting very little money back, and I had a major emergency. Yeah. And so again, I really, really, I'm glad you mentioned that. A really good recommendation is keep your documentation and, be very organized about that, because they're going to ask for that. And so can we talk about the med kit now? No? Okay. We got a few more. Okay. That I think are important. Malaria is another one. Oh, yeah. Okay, good. So malaria is very important. It's transmitted by the female Anopheles mosquito. And there's several species under that genus, right? And so the Anopheles, not every Anopheles mosquito is going to transmit at the same competency, but, around the world you do have. And the most
the most version of concern for the falciparum, which is malaria's falciparum. So there's different types of malaria. There's ovale malaria and OLC, vivax, and then the falciparum.
Why is that important? That to mention that there's multiple strands, I guess.
Yeah, because they have different effects, right? So some of them, a vast majority of them, you're going to get sick, you're going to get a fever. You should still treat it, right? Because what happens is the eggs are still coming out of the liver, right? So they come out cyclically. So you really need a good treatment to make sure to take care of that permanently.
Okay.
In the past, before current medications, it was just you had malaria for the rest of your life kind of thing. But that's not the case anymore, right? We're past that. But malaria parasite is also very, very tricky and is becoming evasive of medications. And so knowing what it is, knowing what's there is important. Knowing when mosquitoes bite, right? So some of the mosquitoes we're going to mention bite during the daytime, like early morning, daytime kind of a thing. And others, like the Anopheles, will bite in the evening. Okay. And so protecting yourself, right? If you're not out on the water surfing and you're, chilling somewhere.
Post surf session.
Yeah, make sure if you can wear DEET. Right? Okay. Put on DEET, spray it on. And it doesn't smell that great, but it's going to keep mosquitoes from biting.
Put that in the med kit, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. DEET always goes in the med kit.
Yeah.
So, but and then we have others like brucellosis, rickettsia, which is transmitted by ticks. If you are, in some locations you have to travel through brush, right? Right. Or through wooded areas to get to
the lesser crowded spots for sure. Yes. You have that little adventure. So you put yourself at risk for ticks and for all these, critters that are living in those areas.
Exactly. And ticks are worldwide. Right. They're not limited to one area or the other, but they do transmit some very, very nasty diseases that are very, very worth looking into and kind of knowing how to protect yourself from that.
So, and so I let's say I got a tick, right? I'm walking through this path to go surf at this remote break, and I go surf, and tick manages to get itself on me and in bed, and then I get home and I'm take a shower and everything, and then I see this tick on me, kind of embedded in me. Is there a proper technique to getting rid of that thing? You don't just yank it out. What's the?
Yeah, you can't just yank it out because you end up breaking off his proboscis, so it's already in there, right? And so there is a way, and a lot of people use credit cards, right, to slide them out and to get them out. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there. I know that there's a lot of ways to do it safely, right? And so I think I'd rather have people do a little bit of research on that versus telling them how to do it, just because it's going to give you the visual know-how on how to do it.
No, that's good.
Versus me giving you the techniques on how to safely remove a tick.
So you're...
Take a picture of it, I would say as well. Yeah. If you get bit by a tick and it's engorged and its head is in, don't freak out. Remove it safely. Again, this is part of the planning process for traveling, right? There's going to be ticks, every time you're coming out of the water and you're going out, check yourself, right? Just to make sure that you don't have any embedded ticks.
Particularly if you've gone on a bit of an adventure to get to the waves.
Exactly. Yeah. Or if you're doing a side adventure, you want to go hiking, to a waterfall that, on a day off or, whatever the case is. Just, it's worthwhile.
When you go on that adventure with the local that you...
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Because ticks are very big, especially near rivers and where you have tall grass.
Yeah, so as far as the removal process, you're saying just, look it up on, say, YouTube or something like that, and there's... Good. Yeah, that's, because I know myself and many, many others, I'm sure, that are listening, have had a tick on them. Fortunately, a lot of the ones I've had on me, I see them crawling along, and so I can just get rid of them that way. But, for those of us that find them that are, as you said, embedded or engorged or whatever, it is important to remove it properly, so that the head doesn't stay stuck in there, because that's really really where you get yourself in trouble. Right,
and then another, like I said, another recommendation is take a good quality picture of it. Yeah. If you do develop symptoms of something, you feel like you're feverish and you want to go to an infectious disease specialist. Say, hey, I got bit by a tick. I took a picture of it. because obviously if you're out traveling, you're not going to carry a tick with you in like a Ziploc bag.
Right.
I mean, unless you want to, but it might not be nice at the end of the day.
Yeah, maybe you just want to collect ticks. That's your thing. I mean,
There are people that
I
do
have
that.
before been, in Nicaragua, and there was so many scorpions that I did start collecting them, and put them in bags. So, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that someone wants to, save their ticks as a souvenir.
And we have that in Florida. We have that in the Midwest, right? Lyme disease,
Right.
obviously,
Yeah, absolutely.
by ticks as well. So definitely something to look into. Another mosquito is the Aedes mosquito, right? So it transmits dengue, Zika, and chikungunya. And Zika is another one of those that are sexually transmitted as well.
Okay.
It can be sexually transmitted. And it's a particular concern for, if you are a female surfer and you are wanting to become pregnant, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
microcephaly is a big concern.
Right.
Guillain-Barré syndrome for a lot of people, although not very common. Zika can lead to Guillain-Barré, which is a central nervous system issue. So just kind of understanding what's out there and protecting yourself. And honestly, like if you're not out on the water and you're just kind of chilling, wear DEET. That's really going to be a big thing. If you don't want to wear DEET, wear a long sleeve shirt, but
Right. Yeah.
ideally DEET will kind of help.
Yeah,
stave some
and
of it
I think there is some DEET that doesn't smell too terribly bad.
Yeah.
Right. So so you can.
And whatever you buy, make sure, because I know there's a lot of organic product and things. Whatever you buy, make sure it has DEET in it.
Right.
Because it does make a difference.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's good advice too.
And then the last one that I want to mention on this is so fungal infections.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So fungal infections are rampant, right? And so some of them are very easy to clear. Your body will clear them. A lot of them are not, right? So you get histoplasmosis is a big one. And so, that's transmitted, when we say that bad droppings are toxic, there's a reason for that, right? And so bad droppings can also be a reservoir for histoplasmosis that can become aerosolized. So I know in many countries, you can do cave adventures. And again, this is knowing local people. Some of them will be like, yeah, let's go in this cave and there's tours to some of them, right?
Right.
You have companies that do tours in some of these caves because they know they've done sampling and you're going to be safe, right?
Right.
But many, many, many caves, that's not the case. So yes, they're cooler on a very hot day, but you can also be breathing in fungal spores.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then that causes a lot of concern, that causes a lot of issues. And this is one of those things where taking Doxy or taking Cipro is not going to touch a fungal infection.
Right.
You need very, very specialized medicine for that. And the sooner the better, right? Because for some infections, if, once they are lodged in,
right,
they can cause lesions in your lung. They can cause all sorts of damage.
Yeah, I mean, that's like you said, bats, mold.
Yep.
A lot of those things that, tend to reside in caves for sure.
Yeah.
And so, again, this is not to dissuade people from going on these really cool adventures, but just recognizing that there are some of these risks when you go engage in these, again, super fun activities.
All right. And so the last one that we're going to get into before getting into the med kit is chronic diseases. And so some of those are things like skin. Right? Okay.
Yeah, I meant to ask you earlier, so I'm glad you brought that up. We've talked about a lot of things, whether it was the jellyfish, a lot of things that can make you sick surfing or harm you or whatever. But so I'm glad we're kind of coming around to that. Skin. You're surfing all day in the sun, so I know you're probably going to go ahead and talk about that, but just what are ways we can, avoid or mitigate so much exposure?
So, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows this already, but your skin is your largest organ.
Right.
Right. It is consistently shedding and creating new of itself. So your skin is a very, very important and vital part of your immune system. It keeps things out that should not be coming in. And so, for example, if you are going to be surfing for long sessions, your bare skin to your board, especially if you have wax on it,
right,
can cause rash, can cause damage to your skin, which can more easily lead to infections.
Okay.
Right. And so understanding that if you're going to be doing long surf sessions, if you can wear a rash guard, maybe do that. Right. And that's
a good rash guard.
A good rash guard.
Right. And again, I know that you're not a surfer, but you're well aware of a lot of these chronic diseases, illnesses, and all that. I know there's a lot of rash guards that have SPF kind of built into it. So are those are some of the ones you would recommend looking for?
I do recommend those, but that should not preclude the surfer from also applying sunscreen.
Okay.
So in all of these studies, about 90% of the surfers were white.
Okay.
And in an almost equal amount of percentage were men. Right. And so there is a certain risk as well associated with overexposure to the sun without wearing sunscreen. And so my big recommendation is, again, everyone has a risk tolerance, but I think this is one of those that should be almost a no-brainer, right? Put on sunscreen.
Right. That's interesting that it'd be I wonder what this study is, but thinking about it, most of the surf brands are probably pumping out white rash guards largely, right? White, or maybe surfers think that white rash guards are going to be less hot or cooler as you're sitting out, in the tropical sun. Is that really the case? I mean, I personally like blues and yellows and all that. I like those colors. But is the white rash guard maybe the most optimal given the tropical heat, the sun?
There have been a lot of studies on color and heat retention. White does tend to be a little bit cooler than the darker colors. So
maybe that's the logic behind.
Yeah. But I want to just make sure to emphasize, take care of your skin.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And a rash is, I think all doctors will tell you, they hate it when a patient's like, I have a rash. Well, that could be literally anything.
Yeah.
Right. Check yourself. Check your body. Now, when you're checking for ticks, make sure you don't have any undue rashes. Some rashes can be caused by heat, right? You get a heat rash. But just knowing kind of what's going on with your skin it's very important. Skincare is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know as a kid, I never wore a rash guard. I always wanted to, get as tan as I possibly could. And nowadays, I find myself wearing, definitely wearing a rash guard, sometimes a long sleeve rash guard. There's a lot of really good, and many of us that are surfers that are listening, there's a lot of good surf brand sunscreens that are sort of built knowing that you're going to be in the water surfing for a long time. So there are there's really no reason not to take care of your skin in that regard.
And I think anything above SPF 30 is, because you can buy SPF 50. I mean, I'm sure you can buy SPF 1000 now, but anything above 30 really is a minor increment in protection, right? It doesn't justify the additional cost.
Okay.
But as long as you apply and you reapply, depending on how long you're in the water.
And that's what I was saying about some of these other sunscreens. They are intended for prolonged use, I believe. Yeah. Right. But still, nevertheless, you do want to.
Yeah. Read the bottle and just honestly follow that. So whatever the bottle recommends. But also understand that if you are, surfing in England, which has a really good surf.
Yeah. Cold water.
You're going to have less sun exposure than if you're in the equator. Right.
Yeah, and when I was working as a surf guide in Nicaragua, we would get a lot of Californians who typically wear wetsuits pretty much all year round, especially if you're in the north. I mean, and they get burnt so fast when they come to Nicaragua. And so this is particularly those of you who consistently wear wetsuits at your home break, at your home spot. When you go to some of these traveling or these tropical places, because that's really at the heart of this episode, right? Yeah. You're doing a surf trip. You're going to Costa Rica. You're going to Indonesia. You're going to, some tropical place where you're going to be skinning it the whole time.
But if you're cold water surfing, if you're in South Africa, if you're in the Pacific Northwest, if you're in England, Biarritz, the additional make sure that you're still using sunscreen. But again,
absolutely.
Cold water, again, there's an impact on your hearing health as well, right? Because overexposure to that. So There's gives and
Interesting,
takes to all of them. So make sure that you understand the risks.
Bottom line is sunscreen and some form of rash guard.
Yep.
Is that the takeaway?
Yeah, and also for surfers that are traveling, if you have a chronic disease, like if you're diabetic,
Right.
right? And I know everyone's like, oh, diabetes is for old overweight people.
Yeah.
But diabetes you're born with. It's
Right,
something
okay.
that you don't control, and a lot of people have to take insulin for that. And so, if that's you, make sure you plan ahead. And I know that those that do have diabetes and do take insulin understand the risks of
Not
how to
happening.
transport insulin, how to store it safely so it doesn't go to waste, all right? So make sure that you understand that and you plan ahead for those. Allergies is another one.
Oh yeah.
You may be allergic to things that you didn't even know you were allergic to until you get to that spot.
Yeah, true.
All right?
Yeah.
So, and part of the med kit is, histamines.
Right.
Make sure that you're taking antihistamines when you're there. Benadryl is obviously the biggest one. So make sure that you have some of that in your arsenal because you get stung by a bee or stung by an insect you didn't know and you have a reaction, right? So have that. You have food reactions, right? Food allergies, environmental allergies, and then if you are a person that has a specific allergy and you need an EpiPen, make sure to carry that with you. Make sure it's not expired, and make sure that if you're traveling with a buddy that they know how to use it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So
More often than not, the person who needs it knows how to use it and will be able to. But if
Yeah.
you're not able to, then at least you'll have that.
yeah, that's good advice as well. And so I know we're segueing towards it, but can you just I know you mentioned a couple items, but let's talk about that med kit that everybody's been waiting to hear about for the whole episode.
All right.
Give me, I want to say top 10, but maybe you have more. So what are the things as I'm packing as a surfer, I'm obviously prioritizing surfboard and fins and wax and, I got my rash guard, of course, and my sunscreen, but what are some things for the med kit? Give me, what do I pack? What's my list look like?
All right, so let's start back then at the beginning, right? So the first thing that we talked about was trauma,
Okay.
right? So things that you would normally use to manage trauma, laceration, right? So make sure you have Band-Aids, and make sure your Band-Aids, if possible, are waterproof.
Okay.
That's gonna really help if you get it wet, you want to take a shower, then you protect it. New skin is one of those, right? You kind of slide it on like it was white out,
Yeah.
and it creates a seal, and it has already some antibiotic properties to it.
So Band-Aids, all sizes.
Band-Aids
right.
all sizes. Make sure that you get that in the packet that you have. You also have butterfly, right?
Okay.
So if you get a laceration, you want the butterfly bandage, which has like two thick ends,
Right.
and that way it'll just kind of bring the laceration to a close while it heals.
All right. We got Band-Aids. Good.
Make sure you have some sort of antibiotic ointment
Okay.
as needed as well.
And when you say that triple antibiotic ointment, is that
Yeah, and you can buy those, anywhere, right?
right? Yeah,
So
absolutely.
the triple antibiotic. But again, remember, the number one thing to remove infection from a laceration when it happens is soap and water.
Right.
Like, first things first, soap and water, and then you can use if it's a small cut or abrasion, then you can use the ointment and cover it up with
Okay.
a Band-Aid and keep it that way.
Okay. Good.
I would say bring a thermometer.
Thermometer. Okay. Good.
Otherwise, you're just guessing when you have a fever, right? And
You're just not feeling well.
you're just not feeling well,
Yeah.
right? And you may or you may not have a fever.
Right.
But the only way to do that is to verify. Carry a thermometer, and they're not that expensive. Get a digital one,
Okay.
because when you're sick, the last thing you want to do is get a mercury thermometer and try to gauge from the sunlight
Right.
where the mercury is and where it's
Yeah.
not mercury anymore, but kind of where that fluid is and
Yeah.
and where to look at. Get a digital one. It's done in seconds and easier to use.
All right.
So I would definitely bring that. For reactions, right? You want to, for fevers, bring Tylenol, right? Bring it in the bottle that you purchased it, just to make sure that you know what's in there. And I know it sounds like basic advice, but read the label. It'll tell you how often and how many per day you can take. The last thing you want to do is overdose yourself with with Tylenol. In addition to that, I would also say bring oral rehydration salts. If you're dehydrated, just buy a bunch of those little packets.
Right.
Right. And what I also like to pack is peanut butter. There's little peanut butter packets as well.
Okay.
And you're like, well, why would that be in a med kit? Well, that's also part of nutrition.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
you're out surfing all day, if you're out expending all of your energy, and you want to go back out there, but you just, you want a little kick of energy.
So your version of a quick, high protein snack, right?
Peanut butter and bananas.
Yeah.
Buy local bananas, get some peanut butter, munch away.
Done. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
They're going to make you thirsty, so just drink your safe drinking water
Right. Okay.
that you have. Give it a few minutes, and then you'll start to feel a little bit more energy to go out there. The last thing you want to do is go out there, run out of energy, and then you're in the water stuck.
All right.
Or if there's a rip current, you no longer have the energy to bypass that.
Right. Is there anything else in the med kit?
Oh yeah, there's still more. So antihistamines, so Benadryl,
Okay.
right? Make sure to bring Benadryl, but just understand that as you take the Benadryl, it's going to cause drowsiness. So if you're going to take Benadryl, if it's in the middle of the day and you need it, take it and just get some rest.
Right.
Because you're going to need it. Or, take it in the evening if something happens in the evening and get some rest. So I would definitely pack Benadryl, in your med kit for that. And anti-diarrhea, right? So Pepto-Bismol,
Okay.
they have the pills, right? You don't need to buy the liquid. Just buy a bunch of those little pills or chewable tablets. They have them in chewable tablets as well. And you can just pop those. Now, very important to understand, I said earlier, look at your diarrhea. Like, look at your poop, right? If there's fever, blood, or pus.
Right.
If you have fever and you notice blood or pus in it, stop taking it, right? Your body's trying to get rid of an infection, and that's just it's going to cause a backup, and it's going to make things worse.
All right.
So if you're just pooping like straight water, yeah, you can take it, and you might not see the effect of it depending on what is causing it.
Right.
But again, knowing the causative agent behind the diarrhea, behind the fever is important. But more often than not, if you get food poisoning or whatnot, it's going to take 2 to 3 days. Hydrate, let it run its course. Or, if you want, on the second day, take, Imodium. Imodium is a stronger version.
Right. Okay.
Imodium will literally paralyze your digestive tract. So, very important to understand the dosage that you can and cannot take. Otherwise, you're going to be backlogged for a long time. And if it is something more serious, you're just causing more problematic things. So.
All right. Is there anything? What about like gauze and stuff? Gauze, like a bandage.
I would bring gauze, and then I would also bring cloth tape.
Okay.
All right. Gauze and bandages I would bring. So the gauze would be good for lacerations. You put the ointment, you cover
Right.
it, and then you wrap it with an ACE
Yeah.
bandage. Also, if you have a strain you sprain or you strain your ankle, you want to immobilize it.
Right.
Right. So again, gauze is going to be very important. A bandage rather.
Yeah,
It's going to
bandage,
be
yeah.
very important to make sure that you try to immobilize your leg, your wrist, whatever it's whatever
Right.
is strained.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As soon as possible, and make sure that you slowly exercise it and move it, right? You can't just immobilize it and keep it immobile. You have to kind of get it going again, but slowly. But it's going to be a big help to make sure to bring a good amount of gauze. So a lot of these kits also have scissors.
Oh yeah, scissors. Exactly.
So if you're going to buy a med kit that's already kind of pre-made for you, definitely get one that has a pair of scissors. So if you need to cut tape, you need to do things you're not like using your teeth like a baboon,
Yeah.
use scissors. I've cut many a tape with my teeth. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying, but
It's effective.
Yeah.
So is that it? Is that kind of the med kit in a nutshell?
no, I think there's other things that can be included in that.
So it would depend on how big of a med kit we want, right?
Yeah.
If we want sort of the simple med kit,
This would be a simple med kit
right? Okay.
to bring. But again, you also want to personalize the med kit to the location, because there may be some things that you're going to encounter that you might need more or less of, right? And so kind of having a basic understanding of those. Some of these med kits will have tick removal kits, right? So, If you have a med kit that has a tick removal kit, do that.
I always like to assume that where I'm going, I won't have access to this stuff, because obviously if you're in a place that has a pharmacy and things like that, you can buy a lot of these items in country. But I personally, again, this is just a personal preference. I like to just make the assumption that where I'm going more than likely won't have a lot of this stuff.
You're right. More than likely won't, or it may go by a different name. And so when you ask for it, the local pharmacist would be like, I don't know what you're talking about, even though it's like right behind them, but it's just called something else.
Right.
Right. So not all medications are called the same thing. And many people know this already, but when you go to a foreign country, you're not going to find over-the-counter drugs at a store. You have to go to a pharmacy. And the pharmacists have hours, and they're not always open. So just understand what's available and what's there. It's important.
Yeah, no, I just want to go ahead and thank you for, taking the time to share this information with all of our listeners, with me as well. I think it's extremely valuable and very helpful for any one of us, surfer and non-surfer, that wants to take an international trip and do it, mitigate some of the risks that come along with these wonderful experiences. And so kind of with that, I just want to go ahead and give you the last word.
So I think what I would say is do your research before you travel, right? It's important to understand the risks that are there. And understanding the risks doesn't mean that you're not going to go, right? Understanding the risks means that you are forewarned and forearmed as to how to best mitigate some of those risks, right? If you know there's a specific insect or a specific thing, if you know where you're going, there's a lot of snakes, right? Understanding what kind of snakes, which are venomous, how to identify them. If you're going to a location, and I've mentioned it several times as well, besides knowing the health risks, the vectors that are there, is knowing the culture, knowing the people. I think that's key to any experience, especially if you're traveling alone. Getting to know the people, the culture, the language, it's going to help you integrate. And honestly, what you'll find, unfortunately, there are those parasites out there as well that just want to take advantage of surfers or travelers that are by themselves. But there are also a lot of really nice people that really want to make sure you experience their country in the best way possible. So knowing the difference is important, but making sure that you schedule a tour with someone, 1 or 2 days. Get to know the people, get to know the coast, get to know where you're going to be surfing, get to know someone locally. It's going to make or break, because most people, I think, have your best interest. Not everyone does, but I think a lot do.
If you were stoked on my conversation with Jesse about safe surf travel, I'd like to invite you to check out my next episode, where I'll be joined by Dr. Patrick Moser, the author of Surf and Rescue, George Freeth and the Birth of California Beach Culture. Patrick's a professor of writing and French at Drury University, and he and I will be talking about the history of California beach culture from 1907 to 1945. So if you're someone who'd like to learn about the roots of California surfing, this will be an episode you won't want to miss. We also want to take a moment to thank Banana Bag Oral Solution again for sponsoring this episode. Don't forget to check them out at bananabag.org. And while you're there, use promo code STAYSTOKED for 10% off your purchase. Be sure to join their mailing list too if you want free shipping. Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Surfing Historian. If you're stoked on these conversations, be sure to share, like, and subscribe to never miss an episode. And don't forget to check out our killer merch at surfinghistorian.com. Proceeds go to help keep this amazing podcast going strong. Until next time, stay stoked.